The evening air carried a hint of fall as Mei Lin hurried toward the back entrance of the Rosewood Hotel. She was running late for her catering shift, something that hadn't happened in the 3 years she'd worked at Magnolia's restaurant. The bus had broken down halfway through her commute, forcing her to walk the remaining 8 blocks in her uncomfortable server shoes. "Sorry I'm late, Vince," she called out, spotting her supervisor arranging trays near the service elevator. Vince glanced up from his clipboard. "You're just in time. Grab your apron and help carry these champagne flutes upstairs. The guests are starting to arrive." Mei Lin quickly tied the black apron around her waist, tucked a few stray hairs back into her neat bun, and lifted the heavy tray of glasses. The service elevator hummed as it carried them up to the grand ballroom, where tonight's charity fundraiser for the City Symphony was being held. When the doors opened, Mei Lin was momentarily stunned by the transformation of the space. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over elegantly dressed people, their jewelry catching the light as they moved through the room. Fresh flowers adorned every table, and a string quartet played softly in one corner. But what truly caught her eye was the magnificent grand piano positioned at the center of a small stage area. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Vince asked, following her gaze. "It's stunning," she replied, unable to take her eyes off the instrument. "Come on, we've got work to do," he reminded her, moving toward the catering setup. As Mei Lin arranged champagne flutes on crisp white tablecloths, she tried not to think about the piano. She tried not to remember the feel of polished keys beneath her fingers, or the way music used to flow from her hands like water. That life seemed so distant now, like someone else's memory. 6 years ago, she had been a promising student at the National Conservatory, her professors convinced she was destined for concert halls across the world. Now she was serving drinks to people who could afford $500 per plate charity dinners. "You're on tray service tonight," Vince instructed, handing her a silver platter of appetizers. "Keep moving through the room, make sure everyone's taken care of." Mei Lin nodded, straightening her shoulders and putting on her professional smile. She had become quite good at being invisible, moving through crowds without disturbing conversations, anticipating needs before guests even realized they wanted something. It was a different kind of performance, one that paid the bills. As the evening progressed, the ballroom filled with the city's elite. Business leaders, politicians, and arts patrons mingled, their laughter occasionally rising above the string quartet's music. Mei Lin weaved between groups, offering tiny pastries filled with smoked salmon and capers. "Thank you," a woman in a deep blue gown said, taking a pastry. She was older, perhaps in her 60s, with elegant silver hair swept into an updo. A name tag identified her as Dr. Eleanor Reynolds, Symphony Board Director. Mei Lin smiled and continued on her route, but found herself circling back to where Dr. Reynolds stood discussing the evening's program with several other board members. "It's truly unfortunate," Dr. Reynolds was saying, her voice carrying a note of stress. "Mr. Whitaker has played for every one of our annual fundraisers for the past decade. I can't believe he's fallen ill tonight of all nights." "Can't we find a replacement?" asked a tall man with wire-rimmed glasses. Dr. Reynolds sighed. "On 3 hours' notice, everyone suitable is either here as a guest or already booked elsewhere. We've tried all the usual contacts. What about just using recorded music?" suggested another board member. "At the symphony's main fundraiser? That would be embarrassing," Dr. Reynolds replied. "No, we'll just have to make do with the quartet for background music and skip the piano showcase we had planned." Mei Lin tried to appear focused on adjusting the appetizers on her tray, but her heart had begun to race. The piano. It stood there, gleaming under the chandeliers, waiting for someone to bring it to life. She moved away, telling herself to forget what she'd heard. It wasn't her problem. She was here to work, to earn enough to make this month's rent and put something toward the mountain of student loans that had financed her unfinished degree. In the kitchen area, Mei Lin set down her nearly empty tray and leaned against the wall, closing her eyes for just a moment. Her fingers twitched at her sides, playing an invisible melody, Debussy's Clair de Lune, the piece she'd been practicing the day she'd received the phone call about her father's heart attack. "The day everything had changed, you okay?" asked Thomas, another server who was refilling his tray with champagne. "Fine," she replied quickly. "Just a little tired. Big crowd tonight," he commented. "Important people, too. I heard the mayor's coming later." Mei Lin nodded and picked up a fresh tray of appetizers. As she pushed through the swinging doors back into the ballroom, she noticed Dr. Reynolds standing alone near the piano. running her hand lightly across its closed lid with a disappointed expression. For the next half hour, Maylene continued her duties, but her eyes kept drifting to the piano. Each time she passed near it, she felt a pull like gravity. The quartet had taken a break, leaving the room filled only with the sound of conversations and occasional laughter. When Maylene returned to the kitchen to restock her tray, she overheard Vince speaking with Dr. Reynolds, who had apparently come to discuss changes to the evening's catering schedule given the program adjustments. "We'll serve the main course a bit earlier then," Vince was saying, "since you won't be having the piano performance before dinner as planned." Dr. Reynolds nodded, rubbing her temple. "It's just such a shame. Many of our biggest donors look forward to the musical showcase every year. The quartet is lovely, but the piano solo is always a highlight." Something shifted inside Maylene as she watched the board director's distress. Before she could talk herself out of it, she stepped forward. "Excuse me, Dr. Reynolds." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. She rarely spoke directly to guests. Both Vince and Dr. Reynolds turned to look at her with surprise. "I couldn't help overhearing," Maylene continued, her heart pounding so hard she was sure they could see it through her white shirt. I studied piano at the National Conservatory. I could play for your event if you'd like." Vince's eyebrows shot up, and Dr. Reynolds looked at her with open skepticism. "You're a pianist?" Dr. Reynolds asked, her tone making it clear she found this difficult to believe. "I was," Maylene answered. "For most of my life." Dr. Reynolds glanced at Vince, who appeared as surprised as she was. "And what would you play exactly?" "This is a rather sophisticated audience." Maylene straightened her shoulders. "I can play whatever you need. Chopin, Liszt, Rachmaninoff. I had been preparing for the international piano competition before I had to leave school." "The Reynolds competition?" Dr. Reynolds asked, suddenly more interested. "When was this?" 6 years ago, Maylene replied. "I never got to compete." Dr. Reynolds studied her for a long moment. "What's your name?" "Maylene Zhao." A flash of recognition crossed the older woman's face. "Professor Abramovich's student? The one who—" "Yes," Maylene cut in, not wanting her life story announced in the hotel kitchen. "That was me." Dr. Reynolds turned to Vince. "Could you spare her for 20 minutes? I'd like to hear her play before making any decisions." Vince looked between them, clearly confused by this turn of events. "I suppose we could manage. The dinner service doesn't begin for another hour." "Follow me, Ms. Zhao," Dr. Reynolds said, already walking toward the door. Maylene untied her apron with trembling hands and set it on a nearby counter. As she followed Dr. Reynolds through the kitchen doors, she caught Vince's bewildered expression and gave him a small, nervous smile. The ballroom had grown even more crowded in her absence. As they approached the piano, Maylene became acutely aware of her practical black pants and white button-up shirt, the uniform of someone meant to blend into the background. Not command attention, Dr. Reynolds led her to the piano and gestured for her to sit. "Play something technically challenging," she instructed quietly. "Just a few minutes so I can assess." Maylene nodded, taking a seat at the bench. The keys looked impossibly white under the chandeliers. She placed her hands in her lap, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. When was the last time she had touched a piano this fine? The community center where she practiced occasionally had an old upright with several sticky keys and an out-of-tune middle section. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play the first movement of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. The familiar triplet pattern flowed from her fingers, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. The piano's touch was responsive, almost eager, as if it had been waiting for someone who understood its voice. A few nearby guests paused their conversations, glancing over with mild interest at the server now seated at the grand piano. Maylene kept her focus on the music, letting her muscle memory take over as she moved from the somber first movement into the more light-hearted second. When she finished the second movement, she looked up to find Dr. Reynolds watching her intently, along with a small gathering of curious onlookers. "That was just a warm-up," Dr. Reynolds said quietly. "Show me what you're really capable of." Maylene hesitated only briefly before launching into Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, one of the most challenging pieces in the classical piano repertoire. Her fingers flew across the keys, navigating the complex passages with precision born from thousands of hours of practice. The music built from its gentle beginning to thunderous crescendos that demanded every ounce of technique and emotion she possessed. She forgot about the watching eyes, Forgot about her server's uniform. Forgot about everything except the music that had once been the center of her world. For those moments, she wasn't a waitress working a catering shift. She was simply a musician, speaking through the universal language of music. As the final notes faded, Maylin became aware of the silence that had fallen over this section of the ballroom. Dr. Reynolds stood motionless, her hand pressed against her heart. Behind her, at least 20 guests had gathered, their expressions ranging from surprise to wonder. "Well," Dr. Reynolds said finally, her voice slightly unsteady, "it seems Mr. Whitaker's absence might be a stroke of luck rather than misfortune. Ms. Zhao, would you be willing to play a 30-minute set this evening? We would compensate you, of course." Before Maylin could answer, Vince appeared at her elbow looking both confused and impressed. "I had no idea," he said, shaking his head. "All this time you've been carrying trays when you can play like that?" Maylin gave him a small smile. "Life happens. Sometimes we have to put dreams aside for a while." Dr. Reynolds turned to Vince. "I need to borrow your server for the evening's musical program. I hope that won't be a problem." "No problem at all," Vince replied, still looking at Maylin with newfound respect. "We can cover her section." As they discussed the logistics, Maylin remained seated at the piano, her fingers lightly touching the keys that had briefly reconnected her to the person she used to be. Whatever happened next, whether this was just one magical evening or the beginning of something new, for now, the music had returned. And that was enough. The next 15 minutes passed in a blur for Maylin. One moment she was seated at the piano, still processing Dr. Reynolds' offer, and the next she was being whisked away to a small dressing room normally reserved for guest performers. "You can't possibly perform in your server uniform," Dr. Reynolds had insisted, guiding her through a door marked "Private" at the back of the ballroom. "Fortunately, we always keep a few appropriate outfits on hand for emergencies." Now Maylin stood staring at her reflection in a full-length mirror, hardly recognizing the woman looking back at her. She wore a simple yet elegant black dress that fell just below her knees, borrowed from the symphony's collection of performance attire. Her hair, released from its tight bun, framed her face in soft waves that the hotel stylist had quickly arranged. 5 minutes. "Ms. Zhao," called a young man with a headset who had introduced himself as the event coordinator's assistant. Maylin nodded, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. She hadn't performed in front of an audience in 6 years, not since her final recital at the conservatory before everything fell apart. Back then, she had been a rising star, confident in her future. Now she was a waitress about to play for some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the city. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Vince poked his head inside, his eyes widening slightly at her transformation. "Wow," he said. "You clean up nice." Despite her nerves, Maylin smiled. "Thanks. Is everything okay with the service team?" "We're managing fine," he assured her. "That's not why I came." He stepped fully into the room, holding out a small, worn leather case. "I thought you might want these." Maylin opened the case to find a pair of delicate pearl earrings nestled inside. "They were my mother's," Vince explained. "She was a cellist with the city orchestra for 40 years. I think she'd like you to wear them tonight." Touched by the unexpected gesture, Maylin carefully put on the earrings. "Thank you, Vince. That's really kind." "Break a leg out there," he said with a smile. "We're all rooting for you. The kitchen staff is trying to figure out how to sneak in to watch." Another knock came at the door. "2 minutes, Ms. Zhao," called the assistant. After Vince left, Maylin closed her eyes and did what she had done before every performance as a student. She played the music in her head, feeling the emotions, anticipating the difficult passages, preparing her heart as much as her hands. The assistant returned to escort her to the ballroom. As they approached, Maylin could hear Dr. Reynolds addressing the crowd. "Delighted to announce a special treat this evening. Though our regular pianist couldn't be with us, we've discovered an extraordinary talent right here among us." Maylin waited in the shadows at the edge of the room. The grand piano had been repositioned to become the focal point, with the stage area now arranged for a proper recital. The lights had been dimmed slightly, creating an intimate atmosphere despite the room's grandeur. "Please welcome to the piano, Maylin Zhao." Taking another deep breath, Maylin stepped into the light and crossed to the piano. The room was packed now, with at least 200 people seated at tables or standing along the walls. She spotted Vince and a few other servers who had managed to slip in, standing near the back. As she took her seat at the bench, adjusting it slightly, a hush fell over the crowd. In this moment of silence, doubt crept in. What if she couldn't do this anymore? What if 6 years of waiting tables and barely practicing had eroded her skill? What if she embarrassed herself in front of all these important people? But when her fingers touched the keys, beginning the gentle opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune, all those fears melted away. The music flowed through her like a returning friend, familiar and comforting. She had chosen to begin with this piece deliberately. Its dreamlike quality seemed perfect for the surreal situation she found herself in. As the delicate melody took shape, she dared to look up at the audience. Their faces were rapt with attention, many with closed eyes, allowing the music to wash over them. Encouraged, Mei-Lin leaned into the piece, adding subtle dynamics that transformed the notes on the page into a living, breathing story. This had always been her strength as a pianist, not just technical precision, but the ability to make the audience feel something. When she finished Clair de Lune, there was a moment of perfect silence before the applause began. It started hesitantly, then grew in confidence until the entire room was clapping. Mei-Lin rose briefly to acknowledge them with a small bow before returning to the bench. For her second piece, she chose something more technically challenging, Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu. Her fingers flew across the keys in the rapid passages, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought couldn't keep up. The contrast between the fiery main section and the lyrical middle created a dramatic effect that had several audience members leaning forward in their seats. As she played, she noticed a white-haired man in the front row watching her with unusual intensity. Unlike the other guests who were dressed in formal attire, he wore a simple black sweater and slacks. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it while concentrating on the complex piece. When she finished the Chopin, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. She nodded her thanks, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow. The dress, though beautiful, was warmer than her light server's uniform, and the spotlight added extra heat. For her third piece, she shifted to something more contemporary, Ludovico Einaudi's Nuvole Bianche. Its modern, minimalist style provided a palate cleanser after the classical intensity of Chopin. As she played the repetitive, hypnotic patterns, she allowed herself to get lost in the music, swaying slightly with the emotional ebb and flow. During this piece, she noticed several people in the audience discreetly taking out their phones. At first, she thought they were bored, checking messages or emails. Then she realized with a start that they were recording her performance. The thought was both flattering and terrifying. After years of anonymity, of being invisible as she moved through rooms like this one, people were suddenly seeing her, really seeing her. For her fourth selection, she returned to the classical repertoire with Mozart's Rondo alla Turca, its playful, energetic melody bringing smiles to many faces. She added her own subtle flourishes to the familiar tune, enjoying the freedom to interpret a piece she had played hundreds of times in her life. As she neared the end of her set, Mei-Lin knew she needed to choose her final piece carefully. She wanted to leave a lasting impression, to make this unexpected moment count. After a brief hesitation, she decided on Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, a powerful, dramatic piece that would showcase the full range of her abilities. She took a moment to center herself, aware of the complete silence in the room. Then she launched into the thunderous opening chords, her small frame belying the force she could produce when needed. The piece demanded everything: technical precision, physical stamina, emotional depth. She poured all of herself into it, channeling 6 years of disappointment, struggle, and quiet resignation into the music. When she struck the final powerful chord, she remained frozen for a moment, her hands hovering above the keys. The silence stretched for 2 heartbeats, then 3. Then the room erupted. The applause was deafening, with many guests rising to their feet. Mei-Lin stood and bowed deeply, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear the ovation. She glanced toward the back of the room and saw Vince and the other servers clapping wildly, some wiping tears from their eyes. Dr. Reynolds appeared at her side, taking her hand to lead her in another bow. "Extraordinary," she whispered. "Absolutely extraordinary." As the applause continued, the white-haired man from the front row approached the piano. Up close, Mei-Lin recognized him with a shock. Professor Anton Petrov. the renowned pianist and head of keyboard studies at the National Conservatory. Her former teacher, Ms. Zhao, he said, his deep voice carrying a slight Eastern European accent. You disappeared 6 years ago. I have been wondering what became of my most promising student. Before she could respond, a tall woman in a striking red dress joined them. Excuse me, she said, extending her hand to Mei Lin. I'm Lydia Chen, artistic director at Powell Hall. We should talk. Another person approached, a distinguished-looking man with silver temples. Richard Oakes from the Riverside Philharmonic. That was quite remarkable, young lady. More people gathered around, introducing themselves, offering cards, asking questions. Mei Lin felt overwhelmed, as if she had stepped into someone else's life. She glanced around the circle of unfamiliar faces, searching for someone from her real world, Vince, Thomas, any of the catering staff, but they had all returned to their duties. Dr. Reynolds noticed her discomfort and gently intervened. Ladies and gentlemen, please give our pianist some space. Ms. Zhao will be joining us for dinner, and you'll all have an opportunity to speak with her then. She guided Mei Lin away from the crowd, toward a small alcove where they could have a moment of privacy. Are you all right? Dr. Reynolds asked, her expression concerned. I realize this must be overwhelming. Mei Lin nodded, trying to process everything that had just happened. I didn't expect any of this. Your playing was remarkable, Dr. Reynolds said simply, but I suspect you already know that. What I don't understand is why someone with your talent is working as a server. Mei Lin looked down at her borrowed dress, at her hands that still trembled slightly from the adrenaline of performance. Life got complicated, she said quietly. Sometimes we don't get to choose our path. Perhaps, Dr. Reynolds replied. But sometimes we get unexpected chances to find our way back. She paused, studying Mei Lin's face. Professor Petrov clearly recognizes your talent, as do several other influential people in this room. I would strongly encourage you to take advantage of this moment. Before Mei Lin could respond, the event coordinator approached with an apologetic smile. Dinner is about to be served, Dr. Reynolds. We need to know if Ms. Zhao will be sitting at the head table or returning to her other duties. The question hung in the air between them, a perfect symbol of the crossroads Mei Lin suddenly found herself facing. Just an hour ago, she had been carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres, invisible to the very people now clamoring to speak with her. Now she had to decide, step back into the shadows or step forward into the spotlight. Dr. Reynolds watched her, waiting for her answer, as the sounds of the gala continued around them. I'll join the guests for dinner, Mei Lin said after a moment's hesitation. Her words surprised even herself. Part of her wanted to retreat to the safety of the kitchen, to return to the predictable world she'd built over the past 6 years. But a stronger part refused to let this moment slip away. The event coordinator nodded and hurried off to adjust the seating arrangements. A wise choice, Dr. Reynolds said with approval. Now let's get you something to drink before you're surrounded again. You've earned it. As they made their way to the bar, Mei Lin noticed people watching her, whispering behind cocktail glasses. She felt exposed in a way she hadn't been since her conservatory days. Back then, being noticed had been normal. She was the scholarship student from a small town, the one professors pointed to as an example. Now, after years of intentionally blending into the background, the attention felt almost unbearable. Dr. Reynolds handed her a glass of sparkling water. Professor Petrov rarely attends these functions, she said conversationally. He must have heard about the last-minute program change and decided to come after all. Quite fortunate, wouldn't you say? Before Mei Lin could answer, Professor Petrov himself appeared at her elbow. May I have a word with my former student? He asked Dr. Reynolds, who nodded and discreetly stepped away. The old professor studied Mei Lin's face for a moment. His stern expression hadn't changed in 6 years. The same intense gray eyes, the same slightly furrowed brow. He had been the most demanding of her teachers, accepting nothing less than perfection. You disappeared, he said finally. No explanation. No goodbye. Just gone from the program. Do you know what that did to those of us who had invested in your future? Mei Lin looked down at her glass. I'm sorry, Professor. I didn't have much choice. There is always a choice, he replied, his accent becoming more pronounced as it always did when he was emotional. You were to perform at the international competition that spring. You were to be my culminating achievement as a teacher. The familiar guilt washed over her. My father had a heart attack, she said quietly. My mother had died years before. There was no one else to take care of him, to manage the medical bills. I had to go home. And afterward? He pressed. When he recovered? You never returned my calls. Maylin met his eyes now. He didn't recover fully. The medical bills took everything we had, including my tuition savings. I tried to keep practicing, but she gestured vaguely at the ballroom around them. Life happened. Bills needed to be paid. Professor Petrov was silent for a long moment. Then unexpectedly, his expression softened. You're playing tonight, it was different than before. Different bad? She asked, tensing. Different deeper, he corrected. Your technique is not what it was. That is to be expected after 6 years without proper training. But your interpretation... He paused, searching for the right words. Before you played like a brilliant student. Tonight you played like someone who has lived. Coming from Petrov, this was high praise indeed. Maylin felt a flush of pleasure despite herself. Your father, he said. How is he now? He passed away last year, she replied. His heart finally gave out. Professor Petrov nodded slowly. I am sorry to hear this. He was proud of you, yes? Very. And he would want you to play again? To return to music? The question caught her off guard. She had been so focused on survival for so long that she'd stopped asking herself what she wanted, what her father would have wanted for her. Yes, she said finally. He would. He used to say that when I played, I made the world a little better. Professor Petrov's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. Then perhaps it is time to honor his wish. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. My private students meet on Thursday evenings. Come to this address next week. We will see what can be salvaged. Before she could respond, a gentle chime sounded, indicating that guests should take their seats for dinner. Professor Petrov gave her a short nod and walked away, leaving Maylin holding his card as if it were something fragile and precious. Dr. Reynolds reappeared at her side. Whatever he said to you has left you looking shell-shocked, she observed. Professor Petrov has that effect on people. Come, you're seated at the head table. The next hour passed in a blur. Maylin found herself seated between Dr. Reynolds and a woman introduced as the chair of the symphony board. Across from her sat Lydia Chen from Powell Hall and several other people whose names and titles she couldn't keep straight. The conversation flowed around her. Arts funding, upcoming seasons, gossip about conductors and soloists, while she picked at her food. Too nervous to eat much. So, Ms. Zhao, the board chair said during a lull, tell us about your musical journey. Where did you study before the conservatory? All eyes turned to her and Maylin felt her mouth go dry. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, to having people genuinely interested in her background. For years she had been just another face in a service uniform, invisible to the people she served. I started playing on an old upright piano at my elementary school, she began hesitantly. My music teacher noticed I could play melodies by ear and convinced my parents to get me lessons. As she spoke, sharing the story of her early love for music, her small-town childhood, and her unlikely path to the conservatory, Maylin felt something shift within her. These people, these influential, powerful people in the arts world, were listening to her as if she mattered. As if her story mattered. And after you left the conservatory? Lydia Chen prompted. Maylin hesitated, then decided on honesty. I've been working in food service. Waiting tables, catering events like this one. She gestured at the ballroom. Tonight is the first time I've performed publicly in 6 years. A murmur of surprise went around the table. That's extraordinary, Lydia said, leaning forward. Most pianists practice hours each day just to maintain their skill level. How did you keep up your technique while working full-time? I didn't, really, Maylin admitted. I practice when I can at a community center near my apartment. They have an old piano that's seen better days, but it's better than nothing. Sometimes I play on a keyboard with headphones when my neighbors are out. The table fell silent for a moment, and Maylin worried she had said too much, revealed too much of the struggle behind her poised exterior tonight. Then Lydia spoke again, her voice thoughtful. You know, we have a special concert series coming up, Hidden Talents. It features musicians with unusual backgrounds or unconventional paths. Would you be interested in being part of it? We could work around your schedule. Maylin stared at her, momentarily speechless. You want me to perform? At Powell Hall? Based on what I heard tonight, absolutely, Lydia replied. It would be a short program, maybe 20 minutes. We'd provide rehearsal time with the piano beforehand, of course. From across the table, Richard Oakes from the Riverside Philharmonic nodded. I'd be interested in discussing something similar for our community outreach program. Your story is compelling, Ms. Zhao. Exactly the kind of narrative that helps people connect with classical music. Dr. Reynolds squeezed Mei Lin's arm gently. What did I tell you? Opportunities. As the dinner progressed, more offers emerged. A chance to audition for a regular accompanist position with a local choir, an invitation to play at a gallery opening, even a potential teaching opportunity at a youth arts center. By the time dessert was served, Mei Lin's head was spinning. During coffee, she excused herself, needing a moment alone to process everything that had happened. She made her way to a small balcony off the main ballroom, stepping out into the cool night air. The city spread out below her, a tapestry of lights against the darkness. Somewhere down there was her tiny apartment with its second-hand furniture and piles of past-due notices. Somewhere down there was the life she'd been living just hours ago. A life of early mornings and late nights, of aching feet and forgotten dreams. And here, in this luxurious hotel, a different life was suddenly being offered to her, one with music at its center again. It felt too good to be true, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. There you are. Mei Lin turned to find Vince standing in the doorway to the balcony. How did you know I was here? She asked. He smiled. When you work enough events at this hotel, you learn all the hiding spots. He joined her at the railing. So, you're the talk of the kitchen right now. Thomas is telling everyone he always knew you were secretly famous. Mei Lin laughed, grateful for the familiar face, for conversation that didn't feel weighted with expectations. Hardly famous, and maybe not yet, Vince said. But I saw those people falling all over themselves to talk to you after your performance. Something big is happening for you, isn't it? She hesitated, then nodded. I think it might be. It's all happening so fast I can barely keep up. That's how it goes sometimes, Vince said. Life can change in an instant. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the city below. I should get back, Mei Lin said eventually. People will wonder where I've gone. That's the difference, isn't it? Vince observed. Before tonight, no one would have noticed if you disappeared for 10 minutes. Now they're keeping track of you. The simple observation hit home. Her invisibility, sometimes a burden, sometimes a shield, was gone. As they turned to go back inside, Vince paused. Whatever happens next, just remember something. That music was always in you, even when you were carrying trays and filling water glasses. Nothing that's happening tonight is changing who you are. It's just finally seeing who you've been all along. The words stayed with Mei Lin as she returned to the ballroom, where Dr. Reynolds was preparing to make the final announcements of the evening. As she approached the head table, Dr. Reynolds beckoned her over with a smile. Perfect timing, she said. I was about to acknowledge your contribution to our evening. Would you mind joining me at the microphone for a moment? Before Mei Lin could answer, Dr. Reynolds was guiding her toward the small stage area. The room quieted as they approached the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Reynolds began, her voice carrying clearly through the space. I want to thank you all for your generosity tonight. Our annual fundraiser has exceeded its goal, ensuring another year of excellent programming for our community. Applause rippled through the room. And I would be remiss if I didn't once again recognize the extraordinary talent we discovered quite by accident this evening. She turned to Mei. Lin, sometimes beauty and brilliance hide in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. I believe we witnessed such a moment tonight. As the room erupted in applause again, Mei Lin found herself scanning the crowd. She spotted the kitchen staff peeking through a service door, Vince giving her a thumbs up from the back of the room. Professor Petrov watching with his stern expression slightly softened. 6 hours ago, she had been running late for a catering shift. Now she stood on a stage being applauded by the city's elite, with a future suddenly full of possibilities she had long ago forced herself to stop imagining. Dr. Reynolds leaned toward the microphone again. Ms. Zhao has agreed to say a few words. Mei Lin froze. She hadn't agreed to any such thing, but as Dr. Reynolds stepped aside, gesturing for her to take the microphone, she realized she had little choice. Heart pounding, she stepped forward to address the crowd. Mei Lin stared at the microphone, her mind suddenly blank. The crowd waited expectantly, 200 pairs of eyes fixed on her. She had never been good at public speaking. Playing the piano had always been her way of communicating. She began, her voice barely audible. She cleared her throat and tried again. I wasn't expecting to be up here tonight. A gentle ripple of laughter moved through the audience. 6 hours ago, I was getting ready for my shift, worrying about being late because my bus broke down. She glanced toward the kitchen staff who were still watching from the service door. I've worked for Magnolia's restaurant for 3 years now. Most nights I'm the person refilling your water glass or clearing your plate. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Music was my first love, my whole world once. But life has a way of changing our plans. Sometimes we have to set aside our dreams to deal with reality. The room was completely silent now. Tonight, when I heard there was no pianist, something told me to speak up. I was terrified. I haven't performed in years. But sitting at that piano felt like... She searched for the right words. It felt like coming home after a very long journey. She looked around the room, making eye contact with Dr. Reynolds, with Professor Petrov, with Vince. Thank you for listening. Not just to my playing, but to me. The applause that followed was warm and genuine. As Mei Lin stepped away from the microphone, Dr. Reynolds gave her hand a squeeze before taking over to conclude the formal portion of the evening. As the crowd began to mingle again, people approached Mei Lin one after another, to compliment her playing, to ask for her contact information, to share their own stories of deferred dreams. It was overwhelming but also deeply moving. For so long she had felt invisible, just another person struggling to make ends meet. Now strangers were treating her like someone whose thoughts and experiences mattered. Ms. Zhao, a voice called. Mei Lin turned to see a woman in a tailored suit holding out a business card. Grace Wong from Channel 8 News. Would you be interested in an interview for our local Spotlight segment? Your story is exactly the kind of uplifting content our viewers love. Before Mei Lin could respond, another woman joined them. Excuse me, I'm Beth Harper from the Chronicle. I'd love to feature you in our weekend arts section. Lydia Chen from Powell Hall appeared at her side. Ms. Zhao is already committed to discussing performance opportunities with us, she said smoothly. Perhaps we can arrange media interviews after those details are finalized. The two media representatives exchanged glances but nodded and moved away. Sorry to step in, Lydia said to Mei Lin, but those vultures will eat up all your time if you let them. Your story is compelling. Waitress with hidden talent stuns crowd. But remember that you're a musician first, a human interest story second. Mei Lin nodded gratefully. Thank you. This is all new to me. I don't really know how to handle it. You'll learn quickly, Lydia assured her. Now about that concert series I mentioned. Are you seriously interested? Because if you are, I need to get you on our calendar before someone else snatches you up. The directness was refreshing after so many polite, roundabout conversations. Yes, Mei Lin said, surprising herself with her certainty. I'm interested. Good. Here's my card with my cell number. Call me Monday morning and we'll set up a proper meeting. Lydia smiled. And just to be clear, this is a paid opportunity. Not a fortune, but enough to make it worth your while. The practicality of this comment brought Mei Lin back to earth. For all the excitement of the evening, she still had rent to pay, utilities due, student loans hanging over her head. That's important to know, she admitted. Thank you. Of course. We're not asking you to play for exposure, Lydia said with a slight eye roll. That particular scam is all too common in the arts world. As Lydia moved away to speak with other guests, Professor Petrov approached. You did well, he said, which from him was effusive praise. Both your playing and your words just now. Thank you, Mei Lin replied. I meant what I said about your card. I'll be there on Thursday. He nodded, seemingly pleased. Good. We have much work to do. 6 years is a long time to be away from serious study. Rather than feeling criticized, Mei Lin felt oddly comforted by his brisk assessment. It was familiar territory, the exacting standards, the focus on improvement rather than praise. The world of classical music training she had once inhabited. Ms. Zhao, called a new voice. A tall, distinguished man with silver-streaked dark hair approached. I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Howard Lee, Dean of Music at Westlake College. Mei Lin shook his offered hand. Nice to meet you. Likewise, Professor Petrov speaks highly of you, which is rare enough to take notice. Dean Lee smiled. Our piano faculty has an opening for an artist in residence beginning next semester. It's a part-time position that includes some teaching responsibilities and performance opportunities. Would you be interested in discussing it? Mei Lin's mind raced. Teaching at the college level? It seemed impossible. She didn't even have her degree. I didn't finish my studies, she stammered. I don't have my credentials. Credentials can be arranged, Dean Lee said with a wave of his hand. Talent and teaching ability are harder to come by. Think about it and give me a call next week. He handed her a business card. No pressure, but I'd move quickly if I were you. Word travels fast in music circles. As Dean Lee walked away, Mei Lin stared after him, another business card clutched in her hand. The evening was beginning to feel surreal, as if she had stepped into someone else's life. Just hours ago, she had been in the kitchen worrying about keeping the champagne glasses filled. You look like you could use some air, Dr. Reynolds said, appearing at her elbow. Come with me. She led Mei Lin through a side door and up a flight of stairs to a small rooftop garden. The space was empty, illuminated by soft landscape lighting. The cool night breeze was a welcome relief after the crowded ballroom. It's a lot to take in, isn't it? Dr. Reynolds said, watching Mei Lin's face, suddenly being at the center of attention after years of being overlooked. It doesn't feel real, Mei Lin admitted. I keep thinking I'll wake up tomorrow and be back to my regular life. Dr. Reynolds smiled. That's how opportunity often feels, like a dream we might wake from. The trick is to grab hold of it before that happens. She paused, looking out at the city lights. You know, I've been with the symphony for 30 years. I've seen many talented musicians come and go. The truly exceptional ones aren't always those with the most natural ability. What makes them exceptional then? Mei Lin asked. Resilience, Dr. Reynolds replied without hesitation. The ability to face setbacks and keep moving forward. To adapt when life doesn't go as planned. She turned to look at Mei Lin directly. You left the conservatory to care for your father. You took jobs that had nothing to do with your training. You found ways to keep music in your life even when circumstances were difficult. That shows character. Mei Lin hadn't thought of her choices that way before. She had always seen the past 6 years as a detour, a wrong turn in her life's journey. People will tell you different things in the coming days, Dr. Reynolds continued. Some will suggest you've wasted years that could have been spent advancing your career. Others will romanticize your journey as if struggling to pay bills while nurturing hidden talent is somehow noble. She shook her head. Both perspectives miss the point. What matters is that when the moment came, when you saw that piano sitting empty, you had the courage to step forward. A comfortable silence fell between them. In the distance, the sounds of the city created a gentle background hum. I should get back, Dr. Reynolds said eventually. People will be looking for me. Take as long as you need up here. When you're ready to return to the party, just follow the stairs back down. After she left, Mei Lin walked to the edge of the rooftop garden, where a glass barrier provided both safety and an unobstructed view. The city stretched out before her, countless lights twinkling in the darkness. Somewhere out there was her apartment building with its temperamental heating system and noisy neighbors. Somewhere out there was the community center where she practiced on their worn-out piano when time allowed. Her phone buzzed in the small clutch purse Dr. Reynolds had lent her. It was a text from Vince. Kitchen crew heading to Gino's Tavern after cleanup to celebrate your big night. Join us if you can escape the fancy people. Mei Lin smiled, feeling a sudden rush of gratitude for her co-workers, the people who had become her friends over the past 3 years, who had covered her shifts when her father was in the hospital, who had helped her move to a cheaper apartment when money got tight. As she was considering how to respond, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a notification from one of her social media accounts, rarely used these days, mostly to keep in touch with a few friends from her hometown. Someone had tagged her in a video. With a sense of disbelief, Mei Lin opened the link to find a clip of herself playing Rachmaninoff from earlier that evening. The video quality wasn't great, clearly taken from someone's phone in the audience, but the sound came through clearly. The caption read, "Hidden Talent. Our waitress stepped in when the pianist canceled and blew everyone away. Words mind-blowing. Classical music. Hidden talent." The video already had hundreds of comments and shares, with more accumulating by the minute. Mei Lin scrolled through some of the comments, her hands shaking slightly. Is this for real? She's amazing! From serving drinks to serving skills? Why is someone this talented waiting tables? Get this woman a recording contract. Mei Lin closed the app, suddenly feeling exposed. The evening had been overwhelming enough without adding social media attention to the mix. She knew how these things worked. The video would circulate, people would be impressed and supportive. Then the moment would pass and everyone would move on to the next viral sensation. But for her, This wasn't just a momentary internet fame. This evening had opened doors that had been closed for years, opportunities to perform again, to teach, to reconnect with the world she had reluctantly left behind. As she pondered what to do next, the rooftop door opened and Lydia Chen stepped out. "There you are," she said, walking over to join Mei Lin at the railing. "Dr. Reynolds said you might be up here. Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Mei Lin replied. "I just needed a moment to think," Lydia nodded. "Understandable. It's not every day your life takes a dramatic turn." She pulled out her phone. "Have you seen this yet?" "You're trending locally." She held up her screen showing the same video Mei Lin had just watched, now with even more views and shares. "I saw," Mei Lin said. "It's strange to think of strangers watching me play." "Welcome to the digital age," Lydia said with a wry smile. "But look, I didn't come up here to show you viral videos. I wanted to talk to you away from all the noise downstairs." Her expression became more serious. "I'm sure you're getting a lot of offers tonight. Teaching positions, performance opportunities, media interviews. It can be overwhelming, especially after being out of the professional music world for so long." "It is overwhelming," Mei Lin agreed. "I thought it might be. So here's my advice for what it's worth. Don't say yes to everything. Be selective. Think about what you really want from music at this point in your life." Lydia leaned against the railing. "And remember that you have options now. That's the most important thing about tonight. It's given you choices." Choices. The word resonated with Mei Lin. For years, she had felt trapped by circumstances, following the only path available to her. Now suddenly paths were opening in multiple directions. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "That's helpful advice," Lydia smiled. "Good. Now there's a room full of people downstairs still talking about your performance, and at least 3 who specifically asked me where you'd gone. Shall we head back?" Mei Lin took one more look at the city spread out below her, then nodded. It was time to return to the party, to step back into this unexpected new chapter of her life. As they headed for the stairs, her phone buzzed once more with a text from Vince. "Whatever you decide about those fancy music people, remember you've always got friends at Magnolia's no matter what happens next." Mei Lin smiled as she typed her reply. "Save me a seat at Gino's. I'll be there after I finish making some new plans." 6 months later, Mei Lin stood in the wings of Powell Hall, listening to the low hum of conversation from the audience on the other side of the curtain. Her heart beat rapidly in her chest, but it was the familiar flutter of anticipation rather than the paralyzing fear she had felt that night at the Rosewood Hotel. 5 minutes. "Ms. Zhao," the stage manager said quietly, checking something off on his clipboard. Mei Lin nodded, smoothing down the front of her concert dress. A simple but elegant dark blue gown she had purchased with her first paycheck from Powell Hall. No borrowed clothes tonight. She was here on her own terms. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of change. The morning after the fundraiser, she had woken up to discover that the video of her performance had been shared thousands of times. Local news stations had picked up the story, and for a brief moment she had experienced the strange sensation of being recognized by strangers on the street or in the grocery store. Her phone had rung constantly that first week. Reporters seeking interviews, music directors offering auditions, former classmates suddenly remembering their connection. It had been overwhelming, disorienting, and at times frightening. Fame, even local, temporary fame, was not something she had ever sought. In the midst of the chaos, she had made 3 important calls. The first was to Lydia Chen at Powell Hall, accepting the offer to be part of the Hidden Talents concert series. The second was to Professor Petrov, confirming that she would attend his Thursday evening masterclass. The third was to Vince at Magnolia's, giving her 2 weeks' notice but offering to work weekend shifts until they found a replacement. That last call had been the hardest. For all its challenges, Magnolia's had been a constant in her life during the difficult years after leaving the conservatory. Her co-workers had become a kind of family. Leaving felt like stepping off a cliff without knowing what waited below. But Vince had been supportive. "You'd be crazy to pass this up," he had told her. "Just promise you'll come back and visit us when you're famous." Now, 6 months later, she was preparing to give her first solo recital at Powell Hall as part of their community concert series. It wasn't the main stage or the full orchestra. That would come later. Perhaps. but it was a legitimate performance venue with excellent acoustics and a reputation for showcasing quality musicians. The door to the green room opened, and Lydia poked her head in. "Just wanted to wish you luck before things get started. The house is full." Maylin smiled nervously. "How full is full?" "Every seat taken with a waiting list. Your story resonated with people." Lydia handed her a program. "Here, have a look." Maylin glanced down at the elegantly designed booklet. Her name appeared on the cover in bold letters, along with the title of the concert series, Hidden Talents, Extraordinary Musicians with Extraordinary Stories. Inside was a short biography that traced her journey from childhood piano lessons through her conservatory training, the difficult decision to leave school to care for her father, and her years working at Magnolia's while keeping her love for music alive. The final paragraph mentioned her rediscovery at the symphony fundraiser and the outpouring of support that had followed. Reading it laid out so neatly made her path seem almost destined. The hardships merely stepping stones to this moment. The reality had been messier, filled with doubt and late-night tears and moments of bitter resignation. But perhaps that was how all stories looked in retrospect, cleaner, more purposeful than they had felt while being lived. 2 minutes, called the stage manager. Lydia squeezed her arm. "You're ready for this. Remember, these people are here because they want you to succeed." As Lydia left, Maylin took a deep breath and closed her eyes. She ran through her program in her mind one final time. Debussy to start, then Mozart, Chopin in the middle section, ending with Rachmaninoff. The pieces were challenging but well within her abilities after months of intensive practice. Since that night at the Rosewood, her life had transformed in ways both large and small. The part-time position at Westlake College allowed her to teach piano to music education students while continuing her own studies with Professor Petrov. Her performances at Powell Hall and other venues provided supplemental income that, combined with her teaching salary, meant she no longer lay awake at night worrying about making rent. She had moved to a small but sunny apartment closer to the college, one with thick enough walls that she could practice on her digital piano without disturbing the neighbors. It wasn't luxury, but it was a step up from her previous place. Most importantly, it was hers, a space where music could once again be central to her daily life. "Places, please," the stage manager whispered. Maylin opened her eyes and moved to the edge of the curtain. From her position, she could see a slice of the audience, rows of expectant faces, programs open on laps, a quiet buzz of anticipation in the air. In the front row, she spotted Professor Petrov, his expression characteristically stern but his presence a sign of support nonetheless. Beside him sat Dr. Reynolds, who had become something of a mentor in navigating the classical music world. And there, a few rows back, was Vince, along with Thomas and several other staff members from Magnolia's, all dressed in their Sunday best. A lump formed in her throat at the sight of them. They had requested tickets as soon as the concert was announced, insisting on paying full price rather than accepting the complimentary seats she had offered. "We're coming as fans, not as charity cases," Vince had told her with mock sternness. The house lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd. The stage manager nodded to her, and Maylin took another deep breath. This was the moment she had been working toward all these months. A legitimate return to the stage on her own merit. As the curtain rose, she stepped forward into the warm glow of the stage lights. The audience applauded as she crossed to the gleaming grand piano at center stage. She acknowledged them with a bow, then took her seat at the bench, adjusting it slightly. In the moment of silence before she began to play, memories flashed through her mind. The little girl practicing scales on a worn upright piano, the conservatory student performing for demanding professors, the waitress stealing moments at the community center to keep her fingers limber, the woman who had taken a chance that night at the Rosewood when she saw an empty piano and an opportunity. Then, she placed her hands on the keys and began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune, the same piece she had used to begin her impromptu performance 6 months ago. The delicate, dreamlike melody floated out over the hushed audience. This time, though, she played with even greater confidence and nuance, months of renewed, dedicated practice evident in every phrase. As she moved through her program, Maylin felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the pure joy of making music without the weight of worry pressing down on her. For so long, playing the piano had been tinged with regret, with thoughts of what might have been. Tonight, it was simply what it was meant to be, an expression of beauty, of emotion, of the human spirit. When she struck the final triumphant chord of the Rachmaninoff piece, there was a moment of perfect silence before the applause began. It started softly, then swelled until it filled the hall. The audience rose to their feet. A standing ovation that brought tears to Mei Lin's eyes as she stood to acknowledge it with a deep bow. She had prepared an encore, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a gentle, reflective piece that had always been her father's favorite. As she returned to the piano to play it, she glanced at the front row where Professor Petrov sat. For just a moment, she thought she saw a smile flicker across his usually severe face. After the concert, the backstage area was crowded with well-wishers. Lydia presented her with a bouquet of flowers. Dr. Reynolds offered effusive praise, and Professor Petrov gave her a list of technical points to work on, his version of a compliment. But it was the arrival of her friends from Magnolia's that moved her most deeply. They burst through the door in a group, Vince leading the way with a second bouquet even larger than the first. "You were incredible," Thomas exclaimed, giving her an enthusiastic hug. "We knew you were good," Vince added, but that was something else entirely. They insisted on taking her out to celebrate at Gino's Tavern, just as they had the night of the fundraiser 6 months ago. As they left the concert hall, Mei Lin trailing behind them with her arms full of flowers, a young girl approached with a program in hand. "Ms. Zhao," she said shyly, "would you sign my program? I'm taking piano lessons, and my mom brought me to hear you play. She read me your story about how you never gave up on music even when things got hard." Touched, Mei Lin set down her flowers and took the program. "What's your name?" she asked as she uncapped the pen the girl offered. "Lin," the girl replied. "My friends say I should quit piano because it's too hard, but I don't want to." Mei Lin smiled as she wrote a personal message encouraging the young pianist to keep playing. As she handed back the program, she said, "The most important thing is to keep music in your life no matter what. Even if it can't be your whole world all the time, don't let it disappear completely." The girl nodded solemnly, clutching the signed program to her chest before running back to her waiting mother. "You're getting the hang of this role model thing," Vince observed as they continued toward the exit. Mei Lin laughed. "I'm figuring it out as I go, like everything else these past few months." Outside, the spring evening was mild and pleasant. As they walked toward Gino's, Mei Lin found herself falling into step beside Vince, letting the others go ahead. "So," he said, "any regrets about leaving the exciting world of food service?" She considered the question seriously. "I miss the people," she admitted, "but not the aching feet or the late nights, and definitely not the feeling that I was letting a part of myself wither away." He nodded. "Fair enough. You seem happy." "I am," she said, realizing as she spoke that it was true. "Not perfect. There were still bills to pay, still challenges to face. But fundamentally, deeply happy in a way she hadn't been for years. I'm playing again. Really playing. And people are listening. They always would have," Vince said, "if they'd known to listen." As they approached the tavern, laughter and music spilling out onto the sidewalk, Mei Lin glanced back at Powell Hall, rising behind them, her name still illuminate,